Hey guys, how's it going? Kripparrian here. So today I want to talk about the big changes that have been announced. There are some constructed, generally, card changes that are mid-expansion. This is like the first time this has happened, and I'm hoping it's a result of a lot of us voicing our issues that we have with the game, and it seems like Blizzard has listened. And this is a big deal because from what I've seen playing Blizzard games, most of my life now, is that Blizzard generally moves at its own pace. When things are pretty messed up, well, we just wait until the next expansion. I don't actually think we've ever had a middle of two expansion balancing patch until this one. So I am surprised, very pleasantly so, that Blizzard has taken some action. So what have they done? Well, they nerfed a few cards. They nerfed Rockbiter Weapon to start. Rockbiter Weapon is going to cost 2 mana after this patch goes through, and the idea is to disincentivize every single Shaman deck from including this card. And that's reasonable, more or less. The thing is, I think there are some base cards, and Rockbiter is a base card, that are generally included in almost every single deck of that one class. So Rockbiter, I don't mind that it is Rockbiter. I mostly mind and don't like getting rock-bitten by a wind-furied character who might have a Doomhammer and hit me for way more damage than should be possible given the current mana pool. So it seems like there's going to be less of an incentive to do that, though I imagine it would still see some play. Rockbiter is still pretty powerful card. It'll kind of nerf Shaman, because Shaman will still play this card. It just will be less effective dealing with early game threats. And then they nerfed Tuskar Totemic. So the Tuskar Totemic, instead of pumping out a random any totem, just puts out a random base totem that can normally be summoned by your hero power. So that makes it pretty crappy compared to its old version, but it's still not terrible. It's still like a total stats of 7, which is pretty good for 4. You get her to cross 2 minions, so it's not too bad because you also get the totem synergy, and you guys know that in certain situations when you have all 4 totems and your opponent doesn't have much of a board, you constantly pump out that taunt totem. So there's certainly some real advantages to this card. It's not like the broken level that it kind of needs to be to see constructed play moving forward. I imagine, some people who are going to play Shaman and have totem-related decks would still include the card, but otherwise it's probably pretty dead now. And that's a good thing. Then we have Call the Wild. So Call the Wild is just one of those superpower late game cards. It's tough to call it the main problem in the game right now, because while Hunter is certainly very powerful, it's generally overshadowed by stronger classes like Shaman, who play a very similar style of game, but are just slightly better at it. So, they're nerfing Shaman, and they kind of looked forward a little bit that, maybe just everyone will play Hunter again, which is just slightly more of a tame deck right now. And one of the big things that Hunter has going for it is this Call the Wild card, and it's going to cost 9 mana moving forward. And that is a pretty big deal because the card before Call the Wild used to be the 6-drop high main. So you do a 6-drop high main, you do whatever you can for a turn, then you Call the Wild. Having a 2-turn break in between those minions is a huge deal, because Call the Wild is really good on its own, but it's hardly game winning on its own, particularly if you had a weak turn the turn before. But if you had a good row, a good curve leading into Call the Wild, then you're going to absolutely destroy your opponent. So it seems like that's going to be happening a lot less, and also the damage ceiling of the card is a lot less, because you will no longer be able to use your hero power along with playing the card on the same turn, unless you have saved the coin until turn 10, which you would absolutely never do. And we have Execute. Execute's an interesting one. It's moving from a 1-mana card to a 2-mana card. Now, I've talked about how removal is generally much stronger than the big minions that usually get removed, and Execute was certainly at the top level of removal cards. Execute was not always just the craziest card ever, because in the earlier version, the classic warrior decks, it was just a lot more difficult to do 1 damage to something than it is right now. So I think just nerfing the card to 2 mana is pretty fair just on all accounts, really. There's a lot of warriors out there, but I hardly mind losing to warrior decks, though it's sometimes a bit frustrating to face the aggressive and tempo warriors, and I think this nerf largely affects them. You know, if execute costs 2 mana, that's hardly ever going to matter if you're playing a control warrior, because usually when you execute something, you're floating like 5 mana on turn 10 and passing anyway. So yes, it can make a really big difference in some games that executing a target on 1 turn or 1 turn later in terms of a control warrior matchup, but in general, in almost every case, it's not really going to matter. But in a Tempo Warrior, I think it'll matter much more frequently. So it seems like Tempo Warrior is being scaled down a bit with this change. And again, I don't love that, but I don't hate that. I think that's okay. I'm like neutral with this change, and I do agree that Execute was maybe a bit too powerful. Then they changed Charge once again. This card has been changed in the past. I think it cost like 0 mana before, but didn't give like an attack buff, and now it costs 3 mana and gives an attack buff, and people still used it with like some ridiculous Wind Fury minions that got just like pumped up and killed your opponent in what we refer to as the OTK warrior decks. So now it's a little bit different. The card is a lot more like value oriented, because it costs a lot less. It enables combos a lot earlier, which is very important, but you can't attack your opponent in the face with a temporarily charged minion. And that is a really big deal for OTK decks. It seems like a lot of the OTK decks that Warrior was able to push out are basically completely dead right now. And I don't like that too much, but again, I don't know, like, combo is a really weird thing. You need combo in the game because it's an amazing archetype, but you don't want a combo deck that's good enough to beat everything else. And I really don't think OTK Warrior was there, but yeah, I would just like to see more combo decks is basically what I'm saying. So even though I don't particularly like the Charge OTK Warrior combo deck, I am hoping that it will be replaced by other combo decks in future expansions pretty soon. The idea of Charge right now is using it on cards that have like AoE attack effect, like Minotaur Alpha or something like that. There's a few other things that you can do with Death Rattles. It's not like completely out there to try some of these combos. I have in the past and have had not very much success, but a 2 mana difference on the card like this can definitely bridge that difference between not very good to definitely viable. So we'll have to see what this is going to change. Then we had Abusive Sergeant. So I talked about how I really hate this card because I just think it's blatantly overpowered when you have something on the board. The price of something being on the board is so much less these days. There's so many Death Rattle minions that have to be killed like 4 or 5 different times. It's just unreal how powerful this card is. I'm glad they recognize it. I think with the change, it's still going to be included in most decks that are playing it already. But again, that just means these decks are going to be a little bit weaker, and I think that is very important in the current meta because it's just not fun to know that you've lost a game on turn 2. And this is one of those cards that it enables that to an extreme level. Also, Abusive Sergeant going to a 1/1, now that I think about it, makes it a lot worse just to play on turn 1. So it's still about as good when you buff something and trade up, but a lot of the time it's so important to play something on turn 1 and you don't have any other 1-drop besides your what used to be a 2/1 Abusive Sergeant. Playing it as a 2/1 was okay because it trades with most 1-drops and most 2-drops, but playing it as a 1/1 kind of means it won't trade with very much at all. So actually maybe the card is a lot worse now than I give it credit for. But we'll see, and I hope actually it's completely dead because I really hate playing against this card and buffs from Zoo decks in general. The last card on the list is probably the most anticipated card to be nerfed is Yog Sauron. So this is the new Yog Sauron. No, it's true. It's actually the same card. But it did get nerfed. It's just a nerf in the way that it works, not in what it says that it does. So this is their briefing on Yog Sauron. It says, Yog Sauron will now stop casting spells if, during Yog Sauron's battle cry, it is destroyed, which, trust me, happens every single time you play it. silenced, transformed, because like polymorphed or something, or returned to its owner's hand. So basically what it means is when you play Yog Sauron after like 6 spells, it's still going to do the same shit. But if you play Yog Sauron after you played like 20 spells in one of those like spell-heavy decks, it's just as good as if he played like 6 spells, because Yog Sauron generally is dead around that point. So what does that do? That basically makes it so the card is no longer a complete board clear. It might clear the board, but I think it's quite likely it's going to kill itself before it's able to do that a lot of the time, which basically makes it a dead card. So Yog Sauron decks are, I think, actually pretty dead. I think it's an okay card, but okay cards are not like viable. You know, viable is extremely overpowered or extremely synergistic. That's like the requirement for a card that's played on ladder and played on tournaments, and I do not believe Yog Sauron will continue to be that. And I, for one, will miss the old god. You know, I have a lot of fun playing Yog Sauron decks, but at the same time, I've had a lot of miserable experiences losing to Yog Saurons, and I can see how in a tournament format where games are entirely dependent on the outcome of both players playing their Yog Sauron, I can understand how that might seem pretty stupid and make people not actually watch competitive Hearthstone anymore. So I think it's a very important change that they made, though I think I'm going to be a bit sad on some cases to not be able to play the card reliably anymore, though still I think overall these changes are amazing for the game. A lot of the cards that are likely to be completely dead after these nerfs are ones that I think nobody enjoyed playing with, nobody really enjoyed playing around, except Yog Sauron, I think. And overall, the cards that did get nerfed but aren't dead will, I think, still see some play, but they've done these changes in a very good way where these cards will still see some play, but the overall power level of generally aggressive zoo-like decks will go down quite a bit. And I think that is going to be a huge step for deck diversity, and I'm really excited to see what they're going to do in the next expansion. On another flip side, make sure to disenchant every single card that was nerfed, because you didn't get full disenchant value, and I, for one, will appreciate the 30,000 to 40,000 dust donation. So, thank you, Blizzard. Hope you guys enjoy my review, and I'll see you guys tomorrow.